Hi, I'm Chef Frank Bonanno, and today we're going to be making a caramel apple pie. We're going to start with our pie crust, which is a pâté sucré. It's a French pie crust, basically. It has a little bit of almond flour in it. It's a real simple pie crust. It's just flour, butter, a little powdered sugar, and some almond flour with some eggs. So what we want to start with is, I have 14 ounces of regular flour. You just want to add that to your mixer. I have 7 ounces of just cubed up cold butter, and that's important to keep it cold. So basically what we're going to do is with a KitchenAid and your paddle attachment, we're going to go ahead and put it down and just mix it on low until it turns to like a sandy texture. We're going to throw a pinch of salt in there, and we're just going to let it mix. This should take about 5 to 10 minutes for it to get to the proper consistency. So as you can see, the flour and the butter have all kind of incorporated and it looks like kind of rough sand or something, and that's about the time that you're looking for. Now it's time to move on, and we're going to add 2 ounces of almond flour, 4 ounces of powdered sugar, and we're going to just start slowly mixing that. Once that gets incorporated, we're going to start to add our eggs. We'll add them one at a time, and I'm going to add 4 eggs. And you can start to see the dough is really starting to come together. And then our last egg. Once it's really come together, that's when we want to stop mixing it. So we're just going to gather that dough up into a ball. We'll wrap it in some plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. This needs to rest for at least 1 hour before you can roll it out. 2 to 3 hours is ideal in the refrigerator. So now that we've got our dough formed and it's in a ball, we want to just simply take a nice piece of parchment paper, and I'm going to dust this dough because it's a little bit sticky with just a little excess flour. I'm going to put a little flour on the parchment paper as well. I'm just going to form this into a nice ball. Sprinkle it with a little bit of flour. That way it won't stick. And then into the refrigerator it goes for at least an hour. 3 hours ideally. Overnight is great, and you can also freeze this dough really well. Okay, so now that we've got our dough made, we're going to start our caramel sauce. And caramel sauce is really pretty simple. And I'm going to start with about 2 cups of sugar. And basically you can make as much as you want. And I'm just going to put a little bit in, a little sugar in here, and just a splash of water. About 2 tablespoons of water. And then we are going to put it over high heat. And we're going to just let this start to cook. And once the water comes out of it, the sugar will start to turn brown, and we'll slowly add more sugar in. And caramel is nothing more than equal parts of browned sugar and heavy cream. Okay, now that you can see it's kind of simmering, you want to keep scraping the sides of the bowl down with a non-melting spatula, because this will get really hot. And we're just going to wait until we start to see some brown color coming into it, and then we'll slowly stir in some more sugar. And this will make it much easier. So what's happening is that the sugar is melting, the water is evaporating, and then once the water is gone, that's when your sugar will start to caramelize. Okay, so you can see we're starting to get some color, it's starting to get thick. And this will start to go pretty quick. So we're light golden there. Now I'm just going to start to slowly add a little more sugar in here. Just a little bit at a time. And just make sure you're incorporating it all. Getting that really nice golden look to it. And for the pie, you really only need about 2 cups of caramel. So you can see now that sugar is all dissolved. It's nice and smooth. You can smell it, it's getting nutty. It really smells great, just like caramel. You can overcook this, so you're better off adding your cream a little bit earlier than too late, because once the sugar gets black, or it'll go black really quickly. Now this is the dangerous part, so I'm going to add about the same amount of heavy cream that I add sugar. And be very careful when you add this because it's going to splash up. Now the sugar will seize up and get really, really hard. Pull it off the heat and just keep stirring. It's very hot. Be very careful. But what you're doing is you have to remelt. The sugar gets solid, congeals, and becomes a solid mass once the cold cream hits it. And then it's just a matter of keep cooking it. And once you have all these chunks out of it and it's nice and smooth. So it takes a little bit of work and you have to stay and stir it. You can't just walk away from it. But we're almost there. You can see almost all the chunks have dissipated out of it. Scrape down the sides of your pan because you don't want them to scrape up and burn. And that's it, our caramel's done. I'm just going to keep stirring it until it cools down a little bit, but I can see all my chunks are out of it. As it starts to cool, and it'll cool fairly quickly, how smooth and the color and the smell is just incredible. So now it's time to peel our apples and cut them. So I have a little bowl of acidulated water, which is just some cold water with a squeeze of lemon juice in it, and all that does is just help from keeping the apples from turning brown while you're cutting them. You can use an apple peeler, corer, however you like to do it. I like to just use my knife to peel. It just, for me, is a little more efficient for me, but an apple peeler absolutely will work. So I've got my apple peeled. I'm going to cut it in half and then quarters. And I'm using Granny Smith apples. Just going to take out the center part where the seeds are. This pie cooks in about 45 minutes, so I like to do pretty thin slices of the apples so that they get nice and soft. And this pie is going to take about 7 apples. Then just slice them and throw them in your water. So now that we've finished cutting all the apples, we've got nice thin wedges. We've got to drain them out, so I'm just going to pour them into a colander. Try and get as much of the water off as possible, because you do want it as dry as possible, otherwise the cake will be a little gooey. I'm just going to go right back into the same bowl. And now I'm going to add a half a cup of brown sugar to these. I'm going to add a nice pinch of salt. About a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Baking doesn't have to be all science, it's just when you're making a pie, it's fun. And I'm going to add some apple pie spice, which is basically cinnamon, nutmeg, and a little bit of allspice. And I'm going to add about a teaspoon of that. Then I'm going to take the caramel we just made, which is about 2 cups, and I'm just going to pour that right over these apples. You just want to stir all this to coat. So now it's time to just roll out the crust and make our pie. I've got an oven preheated to 375 degrees, and I'll bake the pie for about 45 minutes. Okay, so now it's time to grab our pie dough that we made earlier. And you can see now that it's been chilled for, this is about 3 hours. It's really nice and firm. You can still see some pieces of butter in there, which is what we're looking for. So what you want to have is a nice little thing we call bench flour, but a little cup of flour. I'm going to divide this dough in half because we need a top and a bottom. Sprinkle my surface with a little bit of flour. I'm just going to kind of use my fingertips to get it into somewhat of a circle. Put a good gentle dusting of flour right on top. Take our rolling pin. And we want to roll this out till it's about a 1/4 inch thick, a little bit less maybe, and a little bit bigger than the pie shell. I'm using about a 10-inch pie shell. And what you want to do is you're going to lift it up, drape it right over it. Try and get it centered. Okay, now we're going to work on our top. Since this is your top, I like to keep this a little bit thicker than the bottom. Just make sure that it fits over with a nice overlap, and we're good. So we're going to fill our pie with our caramel and apples. And then we're just going to lay our top right over it. So now that we've draped both the top and the bottom, we're going to want to go around and just cut off the excess, leaving about a ½ inch. Okay, and you can reuse this dough probably one more time, so if you want to make a small pie, that's fine. Then I like to just flip it all up. Don't get too fancy with this portion of it, just roll the bottom over the top. And really you could stop there, but if you want it to be, that's when you'll give it a crimp like this. Then what we want to do to top it is I'm just going to crack an egg and just whisk that up and glaze it. Just a light glaze over it. Just a little pinch of granulated sugar, and that'll help caramelize on top. Doesn't have to be a lot of sugar. And you're ready for a 375-degree oven for about 45 minutes until it turns golden brown. So it's been about 45 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and check the pie. It's looking perfect. So we'll want to let this sit and rest for at least 15 minutes till it cools down. Otherwise it'll be too runny to cut. So our pie is cooled down completely right now. It's just room temperature. I'm going to go ahead, just take my knife. Get a little extra in there. So I'm Chef Frank Bonanno, and this is caramel apple pie for Wednesday's pie.